Hello, music fans, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Dark Helmet, and today we're continuing our Critiquing the Critic series. The first episode of this series, we had done a Rolling Stone review of the Queen jazz album as written by David Marsh. It wasn't a particularly friendly one, in fact, it was downright hostile, especially the one line, rock's first truly fascist rock band is just ridiculous. It was over the top. I'm sure he is just trying to be controversial, but that whole reaction, that whole review just seems so um, I don't know. It just seems so angry and personal, and that's really what once Queen started getting some popularity and the critics were realizing that they weren't going to remain in the box that they wanted them to remain in. The criticisms got harsher and harsher and more personal as it went on. I don't know why people get so uptight about things that they have no direct connection over. I don't understand, but I mean, I have no if somebody wants to give a negative review of something, by all means, I mean, not everybody has to like everything. But I think a critic has to have some responsibility. I don't think that they can just say stupid things like, the first truly fascist rock band. I mean, because that has such strong connotations to it, and it just seems very irresponsible to put something like that down in print. And I'm quite surprised the editors at Rolling Stone didn't like ixnay on that and say, come on, like let's not go too over the top. But like I say, Rolling Stone weren't always haters. They're actually fans of Queen nowadays, and I know they've retracted a few of their earlier articles because I think even they realized the venom in them was a little over the top. And of course, history has just shown them to look bad because Queen became one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved band in history. They're as relevant today as they were, 50 years ago, which is, not too many bands can say that. So we're going back to Queen 1 here. We're listening to Gordon Fletcher. So let's see what he has to say. Okay, rumor has it that Queen shall soon be crowned the new Led Zeppelin, which is an event that certainly suit this observer just fine. Okay, so here we are right away. I mean, it's a great compliment to have. Led Zeppelin were like the band at the time. So being compared to Led Zeppelin would have been very high praise. Of course, as albums went on, they became less and less like Led Zeppelin and more like Queen. So perhaps that's why the critics slowly started turning on them. I think they were all expecting more Led Zeppelin sounds, but Queen was never going to be Led Zeppelin. They didn't have Freddie Mercury. They didn't have Brian May and a custom guitar. They had their own sound, which was great. But Led Zeppelin was more like blues metal, or yeah, as opposed to blues metal is a lot more melodic, I guess. As opposed to say something like Stone Cold Crazy off the Sheer Heart Attack album, which was very aggressive, very fast. That was a little different than what Led Zeppelin was putting out, and I think that's generally why Queen was coined as one of the originators of thrash metal because it was a little harder than what Led Zeppelin was doing. I mean, Led Zeppelin, um, Ozzy Osbourne, those type of guys, they were playing heavy metal, but it was like I say, it was blues inspired heavy metal. It was a little different than the kind of the speed metals and the thrash metals that came after it. I mean, it was certainly an influence. It was the foundation of that kind of metal. But like I say, I think I can see why he's comparing Queen to Led Zeppelin because that first album was it's a great hard rock guitar album. Like Brian May's guitar on the first album is extraordinary. So where are we? There's no doubt that this funky, energetic English quartet has all the tools they need to lay claim to Zepp's abdicated heavy metal throne, and beyond that to become a truly influential force in the rock world. Their debut album is superb. And again, he's touching on taking over the throne from Led Zeppelin, which Queen was never going to do. I don't even think Queen had the intention of doing that. Queen is a diverse rock band. Now, of course, it's easy to say that sitting here in 2022, as opposed to back in 1973 when Queen's only had one album. They had no idea that the diversity that was going to follow. They can only kind of go by what they heard on the album. And if I'd never heard Queen before and I heard the Queen one album only, I would assume that they were moving into the heavy metal genre as well. So it's not outrageous for him to kind of make that comparison to Led Zeppelin here. And like I say, it's a great comparison to make. And just that final line, their debut album is superb. I mean, he definitely could tell that there was something special about this band. So yeah, credit to Gordon Fletcher here. He certainly has a far better ear for music than David Marsh did a little later on, perhaps. But perhaps he had the benefit of only hearing the one album, right? It's Queen became harder and harder to define with each new album because it became so diverse, it became impossible to stick them in a box. And that used to drive critics crazy because the critics wanted to tell the audience what a band was. They are the ones who were trying to drive the narrative all the time. And that's why the critics hated Queen, and why Queen eventually said, F you to the critics. They didn't need the critics because the critics weren't helping them at all anyways. If anything, they were holding them back. For those people who are easily fooled by a social narrative, they would have been turned off of the Queen sound right away because what they read in Rolling Stone magazine. And I hate to say it, but that's true. I mean, people are just their minds are very easily led. And yeah, it's too bad. The Zeppelin analogy is not meant to imply that Queen's music is anywhere near as blues based as the content of Led Zeppelin 1 and 2. Okay, well, that's interesting. So he touches on it here about Zepp being more blues based, and obviously Queen not so much. No, their songs are more in the Who vein. Straight ahead rock with slashing, hard driving arrangements that rate with the finest moments of Who's Next and Quadrophenia. And yeah, again, going just off the first album, and again, 2020. I mean, I look back and I think, well, the Who. I mean, Quadrophenia maybe, blah blah blah. And I love the Who, by the way. Um, Meaty, beady, big and bouncy, tongue twister. I've always loved that album. It's one of my favorite albums from the Who. But yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to draw these comparisons to Zeppelin or to Who because yeah, I've just heard so much Queen music and I've just heard the diversity. I mean, I can certainly know certain songs are influenced by these kind of sounds, but to say that Queen would say was influenced by uh, would be, impossible to say. Queen songs could be influenced by, but I think Queen as a band, if they had an influence, it was the Beatles. I think the Beatles were the only other band that could touch Queen as far as diversity goes. And if you remember back to my Queen is the GOAT, it was really the Beatles that I always, that were always up there and very difficult to choose, who was superior. At that point, it just becomes honestly just a personal opinion. But okay, let's go on. Yet there's a certain level of intelligence with which the show is presented, a structured sanity that coexists along the maniacal fury that gives me the impression that the band must have had a lot of Yes songs on their turntables in the 3 years this album was taking shape. I had a good friend that was a massive Yes fan, and I think Queen were also probably Yes fans. I mean, they had Steve Howe on the Innuendo song, and he was a guitarist for Yes, I believe. And so yeah, they were probably partially influenced by Yes. But again, I go, I'm going 2020, and I'm looking back, and I can certainly see there are songs that were influential or influenced by Yes, perhaps. But I mean, I think the band as a whole, I don't think that, I think they were always um, trying to find their own sound. I don't think they were trying to be influenced by anybody. Like I say, with the except, they all had influences. Everybody's had musical influences, but I think Queen made an effort to not have their sound overly influenced by any particular one band, other than, like I say, maybe the Beatles, only by virtue of the diversity. Um, Great King Rat and Doing All Right are most indicative of the intricacy of Queen's product. Very true. Each a lengthy piece composed of several vignettes. The contrasting moods of the latter are stark. At opposite moments, calm and thunderous, summoning up memories of a thing called Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. The group does direct three-chord rock just as well, though, with Keep Yourself Alive displaying a truly awesome move for the jugular. And yeah, again, I mean, I got to hand it to Gordon here. It's almost like he had a little bit of a time machine, and he's been able to kind of look ahead to what the band was all about, and he's really summing up the band really well here. And I guess to be fair, the album was the album was pretty blatant in its sounds, and yeah, he's definitely caught up on it. He's been noticing the detail in songs like Great King Rat, um, and just the straightforward hard rock driving songs like Keep Yourself Alive. Very, I'm gonna have to look for more reviews by this guy. I'd be interested to see if his opinion of Queen changed as the band began to change over the years. Going to from hard rock on the first album, almost heavy metal, to more of a prog sound in the second, and then into the diversity when Queen really started to diversify during the Sheer Heart Attack album. Perhaps a little more of a pop sound, but I mean, there's all kinds of great sounds on that album that wouldn't classify as pop. And each progressive album after that just offered something new. Okay, so personnel. Brian May plays guitar, and if it seems as though he really knows the ins and outs of its instrument, it's for good reason. He made it himself. From wood he found in a 100-year-old fireplace, a bizarre creation with rollers where you would normally expect to find a nut, and where you'd normally expect to find holes in a three-piece band sound, you'll instead find May making excellent use of his instrument's electrical attributes. A master of fuzz, wah, and sustain, his solos are persistent, hard-hitting, and to the point. And again, I mean, we're going back in 1973 here, and an American critic. I mean, how much did he know about? I mean, just the fact that he knew that Brian May's guitar um, was homemade, that he must have been, so taken by the band that he obviously did his research, and he's very accurate here. He's pointing out something very unique about the band, and although he might not have implied that, just the way he wrote this. Um, he knows that there's something very unique and special about this particular guitarist. And he's already kind of touching, in a way, he's already kind of touching on the diversity of Queen by saying this. Because what he's saying is he's mastered his instrument, and it's not just an instrument that everybody else has. It's an instrument that only he has. And that, yeah, that adds to that Queen sound. Vocalist Freddie Mercury has a strong, steady voice that never lacks for power and authority. Through the storms of lyre to the artsy choir boy innocence of My Fairy King, he handles a wide range of vocal chores, never once losing his air of cocky, regal arrogance. And again, he's only heard the one album. Freddie really hadn't truly, well, I mean, he did a little bit, but he really mastered his voice later on, and songs like Cool Cat, and his the vocal ranges that he hit on albums moving forward. Again, he's kind of touched on that a little bit here. Never lacking for power and authority. He's pointing out the artsy choir boy innocence of My Fairy King, so he's already hearing the nuanced details of Freddie's voice here and the diversity of it, and just, yeah, and never once losing that air of cocky regal arrogance, um, that confidence, that I'm here to stay, and you're gonna love me, and yeah, he touches on that, and it's really interesting because again, we have to remember we're going back to 1973 for this review. I mean, Gordon knew more about Queen and the abilities of this band than David Marsh did many years after reviewing the jazz album. But again, I think that has to do when David Marsh did his review, new sounds like the punk rock movement and kind of the social movement against the establishment was really starting to take root, and these kind of regal, you know, over the top bands weren't really, everybody expected Queen to fall apart around these times. So I guess David Marsh again was just trying to be a leader of that narrative, and unfortunately Queen outlasted all of them. Punk rock died soon after, all these new sounds evolved, and Queen just kept making great music and kept being loved universally. And yeah, and they're, like I say, they're as relevant today as they were back in 1973. So good on Gordon here for his foresight to see the unique talents of this band. Let's just say the product of drummer Roger Meadows Taylor and bassist Deacon John, I love that, is explosive, a colossal sonic volcano whose eruption maketh the world tremble. And what I think what he's touching on here is something that I've touched on before. Rock music, the foundation of rock music is bass and drums. If you don't have solid bass and drums, everything else just falls apart. And that's especially true on the live stage. And I think that's what made Queen really excel on the live stage is Taylor and Deacon could pull off live what they were putting together on studio. They were just absolutely rock solid, uh, keeping time with such perfection, and it just gave that freedom for Freddie and Brian to kind of explore because they always knew the foundation was going to be there to root them to the song, so so it never falls apart, and that's why Queen was so tight for so long because of Taylor and Deacon. You really got to give those two credit for the live Queen sound. I don't think Queen could have produced what they did without those two being as solid as they were. There's a song on the album remarkably reminiscent of Communication Breakdown called Modern Times Rock and Roll, and that's exactly what Queen's music is. They're the first of a whole new wave of English rockers, and you had best learn to love them now because they're here to stay. Regal bearings aside, Queen is a monster. I mean, I just love that. I love the way that's worded. I love the way he wrote this article. And I guess unfortunate for I don't unfortunate's not the right word. I think they were expecting that Queen were going to keep on this kind of hard rock metal kind of sound. I think that's really what the critics, especially the American critics, really expected from Queen. And when Queen didn't do that, I think that's why they kind of turned on them because they wanted to tell Queen what to do. They wanted to tell Queen what kind of music to make, and Queen's like, no, fellas, sorry. I mean, we're Queen. We do what I think David Marsh even said it in his article. We're Queen. We're going to do what we want to do. He made it sound like it was a negative. I don't hear a negative. What I hear is a band who's confident in their sound, that doesn't require the critics to love them. They don't require to duplicate a sound that was popular in the past. They took chances. They created their own stuff, their own music, and their own sound. And that's why they're as relevant today as they've ever been. And that's why they're as absolutely legendary, because nobody touches them. Nobody touches their diversity. Nobody touches their talent, with the maybe exception of the Beatles, and that's not the worst thing to say. I mean, the Beatles is pretty high praise for anybody to be compared to. They are, like I say, the grandfathers of everything that came after them. Um, their diversity in sound helped create metal, it helped create pop, it helped create so many genres of music. I think Queen did it a little better, perhaps, but that might have to do with better recording techniques and being able to listen to the Beatles themselves and get a little few hints. So credit to the Beatles for, I think, probably the main influence over the Queen sound moving forward, I would say. I mean, there's certainly Led Zeppelin in there, there's certainly The Who in there, there's certainly Yes in there. I mean, there are certainly influences from other bands, but I would venture to guess that the Beatles were, if you were to ask all four band members and they had to agree to the most influential music in their careers, I think they would have to settle on the Beatles. And like I say, that's pretty high praise. So for both the Beatles and Queen, actually. So there we have it. Gordon Fletcher, thank you very much. I thought your review was excellent, far better than the venom that David Marsh spit out many years later. And as we know, Rolling Stone, I'm pretty sure Rolling Stone has actually come out and retracted a few of the articles that they wrote about Queen early on. I think as they realize that Queen's going to outlast the magazine probably. So yeah, it's usually best to get on the good side of history in that regard. So I hope you guys all enjoyed this one. I love this critiquing the critics series, so I hope you guys keep enjoying these. I'm going to try to pick up on perhaps a British magazine article for the next one. I don't want to keep picking on Rolling Stone. Like I say, I just did a second Rolling Stone because I wanted to give a little bit of I didn't want to leave the impression that Rolling Stone were all bad, and like I say, that David Marsh article was brutal and unnecessary. So I think it was only fair to cast a little bit of light in Rolling Stone's way for this one. So yes, Rolling Stone, thank you very much for a very nuanced and article with a lot of foresight about the direction of the band, and to Gordon Fletcher, of course, for putting together such a great article. So until the next one, take care. I hope you enjoyed this, and yeah, I had a blast. See ya.